it's important for us to really have as wide a conversation. And that's what I want to connect with what Professor Nick has just said. The food system, to our understanding, is an extremely complex system. And as in any complex system, if you add or subtract one part of the system, it can throw the entire system out. And if we're only focused on our area, we won't even know what that impact has been and why the system is not working. And so for that purpose, I'd like to thank Agri SA for approaching the issue around food in a systemic way. But it is complex, and along the way there will be issues that we won't necessarily everyone will agree on. But then let us debate it, because it's necessary for all of us in South Africa. Our future is tied. The first thing I want to say is that our food system is, seen from a consumer perspective, is not delivering. It is not delivering because perhaps the foundational part of a food system, its primary objective, its raison d'etre, is to be able to provide access to sufficient and nutritious food for the population. That is, I'm sure, why you get up every morning and why you invest your time and energy and money to ensure that there is food at the end of the day, that whoever wishes to purchase it can in fact purchase it. But when we look at our South African context, we see that whilst you have done your job, so there is national security at a national level, so farmers are producing. Yet when we look at the household level, when we look at the level of the ordinary South African, or perhaps 25% of the South African population, then we see that their access is stifled. And so we need to ask the question, why? And just one example is that a professor has just mentioned that he sees our situation as strategic and a structural crisis. I would like to suggest today that perhaps at the root of our strategic and structural crisis in South Africa is actually undernutrition. And one example of that is that about 30% of our boy children and 25% of our girl children are stunted currently. So that means that 25% of all our investment in education is going to go nowhere. Already we know that in 20 years from now, 25 years from now, 25% of our labor force will not be able to participate in a new economy. And the basis of that rests in the inability to access sufficient nutrition. Affordability is really the relationship between the price of the good or service I wish to procure and the amount of money I have available to me to procure that. So it's these two things. So let's look at prices. South Africans are net buyers of food. We access our food at the retail end. I mean, it's a sorry story that we often hear about kids saying that milk comes from a carton, but it's the reality of life that is where they go to get the milk. They go to the store. And so we are net buyers of food. So price determines access. We as the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group, we track the cost of a basket of 44 very basic foods. Let me say one or two things about our index. So how did we arrive at those specific 44 foods and the quantities at which we measure it? So we have gone with focus groups to women in Alexandra, in Hillbrow, in Johannesburg area, in Soweto. We've gone to women in Springbok and in North Cape. We've gone to women in Langa and Gugulethu and Delft in Cape Town, in eThekwini, in Matubatuba, in various parts of the country. And we've asked them, should you have sufficient income, what would be the basket of food you wish to purchase for your household? And on the basis of what we heard, we then constructed this basket of 44 very basic foods to feed a household of 7 persons. Now in September 2023, this last index, the average cost of that basket stood at 5,155 rand. Now, admittedly, this basket is not even nutritionally complete. It is merely the basket that people would ordinarily buy. We have seen over the past year the cost of this basket increase by 7.3%. Our inflationary figures and that of Stats SA differs. Of course, because Stats SA gets a bigger basket. They focus on the entirety of the country. We have a smaller basket and we focus on a select section of the South African population. And so in that sense, our figures, our inflation levels shift and change, but the trajectory always follows each other. So you can be quite sure if our basket increase, so will Stats SA CPI food. The trajectory tends to follow each other. Those foods include, for instance, things like maize meal and samp and sugar beans and soups and milk and a few eggs and bread, etc. And out of that 44 foods, we have 16 core foods. Now, those 16 core foods, which would be your rice, your potatoes, your onions, your chicken, your maize, your bread, your vegetable oil, those core foods, in fact, determine the level of nutritional diversity on the plates of ordinary South Africans. Those are the prices we need to watch with an eagle eye. Because if the core foods increase beyond affordability, households will struggle to buy that food. But then they will leave out your fresh vegetables. They will leave out your leafy vegetables. They will leave out all those micronutrients necessary for proper bodily function and for nutrition. And so we will still have people with food in the stomach, but we will still have our stunting problem, which will come to meet us in 30 years with low economic productivity. There's a direct link between stunting and economic productivity. So those are the foods we need to actually watch very carefully. The following slide it just shows how this basket has increased. But let me go to the next slide, the core food slides. And there you can see really how these prices have increased and has become absolutely unaffordable to most low-income South African households. And I think we are probably speaking about something like 60% of our population. So the one area, of course, are prices. The other area in affordability is, can I buy it? And if I can buy it, it will depend on the amount of money I have in my pockets. Now, when we introduced the national minimum wage, the National Minimum Wage Commission told us about a couple of years ago that it would improve the level of wages almost across the board for South Africans, because about 60% of South African workers earn either at the level of the national minimum wage or in some cases with exemptions below it. So it's a good yardstick for us to be able to compare the level of affordability. Now, in September of 2023, a worker earning a national minimum wage would have brought home something like 4,067 rand, perhaps a little bit more, because most companies don't take it day by day. It's easier just to have a flat kind of rate. Now, households tell us that this is how they look at the household budget. How does the budget work? Because a lot of people think, well, I've got 4,000 in wages. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to buy food. For low-income households, that's not how the budget works. There are a few things even more important than food. And so the most important thing would be your transport. Because if there is a worker in the home, that worker has to get to work because the household depends on that wage. As a side issue, that is why we are seeing so much informal settlements closer to the cities on the same routes where the taxi goes. Because if you can live next to on the same taxi route, you can cut back on your transport expenses. So transport is critical. The second area is electricity, because you need electricity for cooking, you need it for security. If there are children in the house, they need to study. And so a basket of transport and 3 kilowatts of electricity in the area of Pietermaritzburg, and I'm sure that this is also the case elsewhere, will cost something in the region of about 2,346 rand. So that is 57% of the national minimum wage. That leaves you then with 1,720. And if that is spent on food, and if you have to divide that amongst a household of 4, because let's remember the unemployment issues in South Africa is such that one worker has to take care of 4 people. So if you then divide that by 4, you arrive at something like 430 rand, which is just halfway above the food poverty line. It's about just over 50% of where Stats SA says our food poverty line needs to be. So therein we see that really the prices in relation to income has exceeded the level of affordability. Now, realistically, we are always going to see food price fluctuations. We will never be in a situation where food prices will remain stable. There are weather conditions, there are input conditions, there are geopolitical crises, all impacting on the food producing industry. So we should be preparing for food price inflation. So how traditionally or in other parts of the world do households deal with the issue of food price inflation? In South Africa, if there is food price inflation, you cut back, you buy less food. But really what we should be having in a healthy economic system is the extra bit of household savings that should be able to carry you through moments of high food prices, because those moments are going to come because the industry is weather dependent, is geopolitically dependent, etc. But because wages are low in South Africa, we do not have those savings, and that means that households are entering deeper and deeper into debt. So if that is the case, I would like to take us to my final slide. And that is, well, where do you deal with this? So you've got prices that are too high, and you have incomes that are too low. It seems to us that we have to deal with both those areas. We think, and this is something I want to float, which I think is in the public domain. So there's always this issue, food prices must come down, food prices must come down, and we forget about the other end of the affordability equation. What does that in reality look like? It means that food production levels have to, or your inputs have to go down and down and down and down in order to make food cheaper at the retail end. We forget about the value chain, we forget about the retailer, and it all falls down onto the farmer. So one farmer in just outside Kokstad told me, a small-scale farmer, and he said to me, Mervyn, myself as a farmer and my workers, we are subsidizing the entire system. Because we have to cut costs constantly and constantly and constantly until we have to sell the farm. So prices must reflect true value. Otherwise, we lose our farming sector. So in that sense, we are going to have to look at where are the greatest margins in the value chains. There is something I'm tempted to tell you. I spoke with a poultry farmer 2 or 3 days ago, and he was telling me the discussion that they are having with the retail sector in order to keep some of the eggs and chicken affordable that is still on our shelves, and how the retailers are saying, we've got a percentage markup, and we will keep that percentage markup. So it's not only the issue of the farmer, it's the issue of the value chain. And I think Agri SA needs to bring that more into the public space. Because in the public space, it is always food prices are high, it's the farmer. It's a value chain, and where is that? So my question is, what's the role of the retail sector? We have to look at prices. Where are the greatest margins in the value chain? And it's in that area where we need to cut back, and not to expect the farmer to constantly cut back. But then I also have another question for Agri SA. I read in the media that Agri SA is going to argue, or has argued, or is thinking of arguing, that the agriculture sector be exempted from the national minimum wage because of the cost of labor. We would appeal to you to look at and say, where can we cut on other input costs? Are there ways at cutting into the cost of diesel? Are there ways to cut in other areas and not in the area of wages? Because amongst the farm worker population, we see some of the highest child stunting. That is my question I'm throwing out. And then on the other hand, greater incomes, of course, we know it has to do with greater work opportunities. It has to do with the ability to grow our economy. And that is what we need the state to do more of. Our solution is that we have to work at both of these two ends if we are really to deal with the issue of getting affordable food on the plates of the majority of South Africans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mervyn. I must say, thought-provoking. Please, if you can remain on stage, we're just going to have a few questions. Thought-provoking and very important, because that's what we're here for. We're not here to be comfortable and being said things that we want to know and we want to hear. sometimes we need to address very uncomfortable questions. I'm going to run in a few questions and answers to break the ice. I'm going to add to the point of cutting the costs. And perhaps throwing it out here for anybody to answer also. A lot of unnecessary cost that is bringing our industry's competitiveness down. If I say unnecessary cost, the cost of crime, the cost of farm safety, the bill that we have to pay to ensure that our products stay on our trees when you're not selling it yet. It goes beyond. That's just one example of where costs can be cut through a more competitive industry. So I'm throwing that out there, but still there's a question that was asked to Agri SA about the wage situation. It's a rhetoric question at this stage. We don't have an individual to answer now to it, but that's questions that needs to be discussed. The living wage versus the minimum wage, the cost where the extreme poverty line is 560 Rand to at extreme level to survive. Yet our grant system, the COVID grant as we called it, was 300 Rand.
350.
350, sorry. 350. It's 200 less than what you need to survive. All of that needs to be balanced. All of that needs to be discussed. So having said that, I'm opening up the floor for any questions, comments, welcome. There's a question. Ankie?
Thank you very much, Derek Matthews from Agri SA. Thank you very much for the opportunity that you're creating for us to actually put these discussions in the public domain. I'm just looking at one of your graphs that you put up with regard to the maize meal price 2022 of 293.44 and the September 23 price of 309. Now that's one picture that you had. What is seriously lacking in that picture is that the maize price has actually decreased by approximately 20% in the same time period. So quite clearly, it's definitely not on the table of the farmer. We certainly have to open up the transparency in the value chains in every respect, and this debate, this narrative needs to be carried through to the public of South Africa. We can't lay the cost of food solely on the table of the farmer. That's just simply unreasonable and unsustainable. Thank you very much.
There's a hand just behind you.
Yeah, my English will sound different than the previous speaker because I come from the Western Cape. I just want to raise a question, and if allowed, I want to make a follow-up if they can give me an answer on that one, but I want to pose it to Professor Nick also, if he is still around. Mm-hmm. The professor stated when he opened this address, he said 20 years ago he wouldn't have to eat. Hy sou nie Thailand toe gegaan het en Cambodia toe gegaan het om te gaan kyk het hoe lyk dit daar as ek hom nou reg verstaan het. But he went there now because there was a change. Now my question is on this specific one. What was the main enabler that created the change? Because that can lead to another question that I want to put now to the last speaker now to hear if I can get an answer on the main enabler. Thanks.
I think let's take another point just there behind you. I don't see any hands on this side. Okay, next one there.
Thank you, Program Director. We're decreasing in the ability of speaking English rapidly because I'm from the Northern Cape. We only speak English in self-defense. But I'm Johannes Moller. I'm with Agri Enterprises. I just wanted to comment on the wage remark by the speaker. Of course, we're closely aligned to Agri SA, and it's always been Agri SA's policy, formal policy, not to negotiate for wage increases lower than inflation plus 2%. Just to make it clear that we're not just negotiating for lower wages, but it makes it very, very difficult. If everything from energy right through to wages are increasing by more than inflation to do development work, which is what we do at Agri Enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With Jack, there, and then Jack.
Just maybe one question. How are we going to address higher wages with productivity?
Okay.
Thank you for a very thought-provoking presentation, Mr. Abrams. Just on that necessary cost that you now mentioned, Lindy, and with Mr. Ramasodi here as well, the farmers are paying taxes, but one of the necessary costs that we have is the inability of the state to provide the services that we're supposed to get for those taxes. And we've mentioned the roads, the state of the roads, and the safety, our farm safety. How much is farmers spending on safety? So if we could live in a country where we were safe, we had good roads, we had good export markets, we had all those things that government is supposed to be supplying, we'd cut our costs tremendously, and then we'd be able to afford minimum wages. Thank you.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I'm going to not taking further questions or comments from the floor. Mervyn, if you want to answer and comment, and then Prof. Nick, there you are. If you thereafter can answer and comment, and then we will close for tea break.
Yeah, so thank you so much for firstly inviting me, and secondly for giving me, for listening to what I had to say. Thanks so much. We would agree, as far as the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group is concerned, we would agree with a lot of the sentiment that's been expressed here. Number one, we believe that the greatest responsibility of a state is the protection of its citizens. And one of the major ways of protecting its citizens, of course, is protecting their right to life, and food is a means to the right to life. Okay? So we into the world of human rights, we into the rights language, that the state's primary goal is to ensure that we can live and we need food to live. So when it comes to, for instance, issues such as logistics, when it comes to issues of crime, when it does come to issue about how can the states provide the stability that business and particularly agriculture requires, then it is the duty not only of the farmers, but it's the duty of all South Africans to be able to make that clear. And I mean, from our side, we have constantly pushed back. So we agree with you. We also find it absolutely ridiculous in a context. I live in Durban. In 2021, just before the big unrest we had in the country, well, in Gauteng and in eThekwini, we had warned that the conditions for such an uprising now exists. We didn't know when and how, but we knew that the conditions exist. And one of our biggest worries is the N3. Because, and we mentioned it a month before the unrest, that if there is to be anything, the N3 constantly blocks the transport from Gauteng down to the ports, down to the cities, etc. It is insecure. We have to find other ways. We have to get Transnet going. We have to get railways going. We have to find other alternative means so that we're not totally dependent on the N3. So even from that perspective, we would totally agree with you. When it comes to the maize price decrease, and while maize at retail level is increasing, this is exactly what we have been saying as well. It is that we have seen prices come down, and it's what the Competition Commission has also alluded to in their last report, that we have seen in some cases prices coming down, and we're not seeing the same at the retail end. And we therefore, the issue is that we have to begin. So for us, it's been the question exactly as I phrased it now, because I don't want to be sued. And that is to say, where in the value chain is this increase coming from, between the farm gate and the shelf? Because we don't know. And is that increase justified? We just don't know. So we have to continue working at this transparency issue. The issue around wages and productivity is a very complex issue. Like I've said already, we are starting when it comes to productivity in South Africa, we're not starting on par with our external markets. Because 25% of our population, of your potential workers, are stunted. So this is where they are in terms of productivity. We have to make sure that we increase wages, perhaps not so much that it's the productivity of my current employees, but that I can ensure that the children we saw here today, it's an investment I make into the future employees, that they will be able to compete in the same way with employees across the globe that I have to compete in. So it's almost like it's wages, yes, it's productivity. There must be a value between what is being produced. We can't also just pay 3 times the value, so we have to find something in between. But it seems to me that the critical crisis we're in South Africa is that everyone, and not only farmers, but also other parts of the South African economy, is being called upon to make an investment into our future workforce, so that in 20 years from now, we're not at the stage where 25% of our workforce will constantly underperform when it comes to economic productivity based on the food that they ate when they were children or before the age of 5.